Good afternoon. We're here in Seattle at the Seattle Antiquarian Book Fair. I'm Taylor Bowie. The date is Sunday, October 12th, 2008. And we are speaking with bookseller from Salt Lake City, Utah, Ken Sanders, whom I've known for quite a while. Ken, welcome to this little project for the ABAA History Archives. So just to start with, tell us a little about your background, your family, where you were born and raised, where you went to school, things like that.
Well, Salt Lake City, the Dead Sea at the edge of the lake. You know, Denver's on the east side of the Rockies. I like to refer to it as Kansas, because they're really a plains city. You know, they pretend they're part of the West, but they kind of aren't. And nobody wanted, Salt Lake City but Brigham Young and the Mormons in 1847. By an accident of birth, that's where I was born. And despite wanting to escape as a child, I never really did. I come from a long line of Mormons on my father's side, though they never got me. I was never baptized into the faith, and kind of spent most of my life running away from it. It's probably why I look like I do, because back home no one would ever take me for a Mormon because they haven't looked like me for 100 plus years. So it's been a real dichotomy of culture for me, because it's like, this is my place, this is where I'm from, but I'm never really comfortable or at home there, because I'm not really, culturally I'm just not a Mormon, and religiously I just I could care less, I guess. I don't have enough of a belief system to be an atheist. So I guess that's why I'm a bookseller. I ended up being a bookseller. It was the only thing left.
Yeah, I understand.
Well, always, books have always fascinated me.
Well, tell us about your family. I know your dad was a tremendous collector of anything and everything, and we should know that Ken's dad just passed away very recently.
Yeah,
he was
about
a great
6 weeks
guy.
ago.
Yeah, about 6 weeks.
Dad was kind of the black hole of Utah collecting. He collected everything, antique bottles, just anything to do with Utah. He had enormous collections of bottles and pharmacy items and advertising, and at the height of mania, like, he has 2 museums dedicated to his stuff, including one was a golf room. It had thousands and thousands of logoed golf balls. Maybe I started in books because that's the only thing Dad didn't collect. I'm not sure.
That's
it
interesting.
Could be.
You were filling the family gap. So was yours a very bookish family while you were growing up? I mean, did you have books around?
Yeah, though my parents read, but they weren't particularly. Dad kept track of his books. There were 2 bookcases, and when he read a book up at our cabin, he would shuck the dust jacket off it and toss it in the fireplace. I vividly remember that. And I wasn't into dust jackets then, but I remember him doing that.
Most kids aren't.
And I don't remember a time that I didn't read. I read every book in the Woodrow Wilson grade school library, at least the ones I wanted to. I lived for shipments of scholastic books.
Oh, yes, I remember those well.
Seaview Secret, Miss Pickerel Goes to Mars, Danny Dunham, Anti-Gravity Paint, and my personal favorite, The Shy Stegosaurus of Cricket Creek.
These are very familiar titles to anyone who was in grade school in the 1950s.
I was born in 1951.
I am 52, and I know all those books.
And that's what got me started. And I was wheeling and dealing comic books in grade school. Buy them for a nickel, sell them for a dime. And I was a serious book collector by the time I was 14.
And what kind of things were you collecting?
Well, my grandparents took us to Southern California, where we had a great aunt and uncle. And we went to Knott's Berry Farm, Disneyland, and Pop's favorite, my grandfather, Pop, deep sea fishing. And then I begged him to take me to Bertrand Smith's Acres of Books, 240 Long Beach Boulevard, Long Beach, California. I have no idea how I knew of this place, Taylor. I puzzled that over the years. But Pop took me there in the old gray Ford, and he sat outside chain-smoking unfiltered Camel cigarettes that would later kill him at age 62. And he waited patiently in the hot sun that summer, while probably on about maybe 64 or 5, somewhere in there. And I just spent hours in this bookstore, and I thought I was in heaven. And I remember the old man let me into this rickety room up in the front of the place, and I bought a giant folio edition of the Doré illustrated Poe's Raven. I bought a Gwynnede Hudson illustrated Alice in Wonderland and some Lewis Carroll books and a Maxfield Parrish Arabian Nights.
You recall how much these books cost back in 1965?
The Raven was $17.50.
Wow.
I can't remember the prices of the others. That one I do remember, though.
How were you able to support this budding book collecting enthusiasm?
Well, so I had a 50-cent a week allowance, and Mom would give me $1.50 to get my hair cut. And you can see the amount of savings I made on haircuts over the years, Taylor. I used to walk 6 blocks to the dollar shop on the corner, and then the 50 cents I could spend how I wanted. And rather than take the bus downtown, we lived about 5 miles south of the downtown Salt Lake. I would walk all the way downtown and back so I could save the quarter that the bus cost.
You were
so I could
determined
buy books.
Lad, that sounds like.
I was by high school. I was running a mail order business. I called it the Dream Garden, which is the name of my publishing business.
Right. So you still incorporate that name in part.
I did. I incorporated it in 1980, but I was using it in the 1960s. I actually stole it from a title of an obscure Maxfield Parrish painting. I bought my first Maxfield Parrish from Serendipity Antiques in the corner of 2nd South and West Temple. And it was full of gypsy juke joints and transient hotels and assay offices, old geologist place, and junk stores. I got them. I beat them down from $15 to $10 for a daybreak in an old 3-dimensional frame. But I still have that. That's one of the. I don't have a lot of artifacts from those days because I've had so many poverty periods between then and now that the book collections mostly got sold. But somehow I hung on to that one.
We were only the temporary caretaker of all this stuff anyway, so that's all right. So you're in high school and you already have a little mail order business?
Yeah, I was selling underground comic books.
Oh, yes.
And I'd run ads that said, you must be 18 or over to order these comics.
And how old were you?
16, 17.
That's interesting.
I was selling them. I wasn't buying them.
No, that's good for you. That's good.
And I was so sophisticated with the typesetting and that sort of thing. I'd never heard of that world. So I would go to like the photo blue shop and buy pages full of rub-off lettering and sit there and hour after hour rub the letters off to make my ads because I didn't know how else to do it. And they're horrible. Oh man, my life as a graphic designer didn't exist because they would run downhill and they'd be crooked and they'd have black fingerprints all over them. I was the world's worst.
Any of these
designer.
great ads survive to this day?
I used to advertise in Rocket's Blast Comic Collector and a Edgar Rice Burroughs fanzine called Herbdom that was published.
So we could find
years.
some of those and see.
Oh, and to tell a story on a colleague, I just found for some reason I was looking through an old monster magazine called Castle of Frankenstein, and I found a letter from one fairly new Bud Plant member, or ABA member, Bud Plant, who I helped sponsor into the ABA a couple of years ago. And he has a letter published in Castle of Frankenstein number 12.
He would have been a young fellow at the time, I imagine.
He was he said, well, I'm not really into horror movies, but they'd just done like a issue on Star Trek, and he wanted to encourage him to do more science fiction.
Did you go to college after high school?
No. I graduated from Granite High School in the spring of 1970 and burned my draft card and my Social Security card and my high school diploma. I hated school. School was like a prison to me. The only two things I knew in the summer of 1970 was I'm not going to Vietnam, and why, after getting out of 3 years of prison, would I voluntarily sign up to go to 4 more years of prison? I still think I'm right about one of the two items, but probably I was wrong about the education.
So what did you do?
That summer, I worked in Hollywood at the Collector's Bookshop for Malcolm Willits and Leonard Brown, I think were their names. And Heritage was on that street then. On
This is the old Hollywood Boulevard.
Cherokee Bookshop.
Gene Blum.
I worked there for the summer, and talk about culture shock from a teenage kid from Salt Lake City.
Did you have encounters with these other booksellers in the neighborhood, like Gene Blum and
I was buying,
Weinstein brothers?
I was buying illustrated books from them. I was heavily into collecting, vellum Rackhams and Dulacs and Poganies and all that. I remember
the deluxe and signed editions of these.
Bud Plant. I found this collection in Los Gatos, and I don't remember Bud would remember the bookseller's name. He had them in a garage, and we went there, and it was just agonizing for me because I didn't have any money, and I somehow managed to put $1,500 together and buy like about 8 or 9 of them, and I had to leave. Like, that's why I brought Bud and a couple of others in on it, because I couldn't handle it. I bought it East of the Sun, West of the Moon by Kai Nielsen.
Signed limited.
Yeah, the signed limited Rackhams and Rubaiyat, Nick Dulac, and the Bells, all of those.
All the good ones.
But they went during the poverty periods.
But you were accumulating these books for your own collection while you were
Yes.
working for the Collector's Bookshop.
And then I really couldn't. Culturally, I was really out of place down there, and that fall I came home.
Didn't hang around the Sunset Strip or anything?
Oh, that was just too weird. I'd 11 o'clock on Friday and Saturday nights. I'd get off at work and go shopping at Ralph's and walking up and down Sunset and Hollywood Boulevards was
too much.
That blew my mind.
Wow.
I remember being in a shop once there on Sunset. It was called Crystal White, and everything in the store was either see-through or white. The floors, the fixtures, and the merchandise.
Sounds like something
and their business cards were see-through plastic with just blind embossing on them.
It's something to be in a parody of a movie about Los Angeles, when it was real. So you went back to Salt Lake.
Went back to Salt Lake.
What did you do?
Well, I worked off and on for Sam Weller. He was the old-time legendary bookseller in Salt Lake City. As I like to tell the story, Sam hired me 5 times and fired me 10 times. Sam and I had a lot of legendary battles in those days because I pretty much didn't do what he wanted, and I did what I wanted. I would take, for example, he wouldn't pay me. I think he paid me $1 an hour. And I would go off to a sci-fi convention in California, and I'd load up my car with his books and drive him to California on my own dime. He never gave me a nickel to do this, and sell his books. But instead of bringing him back his money, I would go on a buying spree and buy him more books. And when I got back, oh God, the fur would fly. This is my goddamn store, and I'll do it how I want. He was so mad at me for spending his money on books, but I knew what I was doing because he was good with Mormon material and Western Americana, the genre fiction and the kind of stuff I liked when I was a kid. He knew nothing about it. No. I remember I got from him, he gave me one time an entire box full of Oz dust jackets. Hundreds and hundreds of them, Taylor. For all 40 books. They weren't first edition jackets, but they were real, unused, never been put on books. He was throwing them out.
Oh, my goodness. So you worked for him off and on. You'd have a little blow up, and then he'd hire you back, realizing that you were of some use to him, obviously.
Right, yeah, we had a very strange relationship. It interferes with me getting along with his son to this day. But,
I understand.
The ghost of Sam Weller
is always there. Yeah.
And
could
Sam
also be a very gracious man.
Oh, he could, yes.
Too.
But he had a real mean, petty streak and cheap streak. I mean, he lost so many customers. He would take books out of a customer's hand and erase the price and double it and hand it in front of them.
This is a business full of strong personalities.
As we've got mostly.
There you go. Luke 4:10, stop by and wish him a happy birthday. Michael Nassau.
Even the assholes in our trade have their good sides, Taylor, you know?
I've generally found that to be true, too. I agree with you.
And we're all the word eccentric in the antiquarian book trade is nothing. And talking about some of these larger issues, you know, the demise of the book, or the printed word, the Kindle debate, all is the new technologies, the internet, the dread internet. Well, it's a new paradigm. pretend to understand it, comprehend it. I'm a Luddite in cyberspace, you know. But I think what people lose sight of is ever since Gutenberg, knowledge, books, words has always been a tiny little corner of the universe. 500 years ago it was, and it is now. That's never going to change. A tiny fraction of people read anything meaningful. When in the olden days, it was because they didn't want you to, because they didn't want you to be educated or smart or know anything.
And contrary today, people don't want to, even though it's all available.
Yeah, and although the internet, by being infinite, really narrows down the information we do get, you know, I think.
It does, yeah. It's restrictive as it expands. It's very odd. When you left Weller for the last time, is that when you really started in on your own business?
Yeah, I was playing, kind of simultaneously playing cowboy of all things, kind of late 60s, early 70s, and then in the early 70s I started working in a print shop. I printed a lot of rock and roll posters in those days, and then I was printing my own Dream Garden fantasy posters. I did a Rob Brown Hobbit poster that Bud Plant used to sell thousands of them for me. They were $1.50 retail, 75 cents wholesale. And
you made money on them, right?
Yeah, I first started printing that in 1969. And then by the early 70s, there'd been a legendary hippie head shop in Salt Lake, founded in '67, Salt Lake's first head shop called the Cosmic Aeroplane. And I'd been hanging out there since those days. And I used to, sometimes I'd loan Steve money because he was always too broke to he'd get a COD Greyhound shipment on a Friday, and Saturday and Sunday were his big days. So I'd loan him $50 so he could get the COD, and then he'd sell the incense and crap over the weekend and pay me back on Monday. And he'd let me I had a little book stand, a bookshelf in the corner of this cavernous place. And
so you couldn't have felt entirely isolated in Salt Lake with a head shop and like-minded individuals.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
This fella
Yeah. It was a birth of a lot of interesting things. It was the only draft counseling center during Vietnam, so on and so forth. Rock and roll band played there. Yeah, but theater groups started in the back room of the Cosmic Aeroplane. And from there, Steve approached me in about 74 or 5 that he'd always had a fantasy of wanting to expand the Cosmic into a bookstore. So another friend, an old SDS radical, Bruce Roberts, and Steve Jones, Steve approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in managing a bookstore for him. And I turned him down. I said, no, I don't want anything to do with it unless I want to own it.
Unless you're in on it, yeah.
So I basically, me and my Mickey Mouse rug talked our way into a 1/3 partnership
in Cosmic Aeroplane.
And we started working on it in 75. I did it out of my old house on the west side, and then we opened the doors. We found a place and leased it and fixed it up. We ripped up an old gymnasium floor from the Provo Insane Hospital and put the hardwood floors down.
These boards could talk.
And especially after the Cosmic Airplane years. And we created this bookstore in Salt Lake City. It's still legendary, even though it's been gone for 15, 20 years.
It is famous even yet.
And it was a wild, wild ride. We had no idea what we were doing. I created the bookstore part. And it was amazing.
How long
people came from several states away to buy stuff there. And by increasingly, I came to the realization, because I was flying to San Francisco, buying collections, doing all this stuff, and it was pissing my partners off. And the final straw for me was I had traded some esoteric French Mormon pamphlet through actually a colleague of the notorious bomber forger Mark Hoffman. I traded a French imprint to the church for a first edition Book of Mormon, which I then turned around and sold for the then unheard price of $5,000 at a time when Weller's was only getting $3,000 for them. And I turned around and had a custom bookcase made to hold my rare books. It cost about $1,000, and my partners went ballistic. I had total investment in the Book of Mormon was $370. And they said, you can't do this. You have to run that stuff by us. I said, no, I don't. Fuck you. But what I didn't realize in my youth was that when you own 1/3 of a private corporation and the other two partners don't like what you're doing, you in essence own 1/3 of nothing because they can control you. They can do anything they want legally.
1/3 and 1/3 is 2/3 against your 1/3.
I've always been bad at math, Taylor.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I would never have a partnership ever again in my life. I did that with Dream Garden too, and that got me into huge financial.
So you essentially
troubles.
walked from Cosmic Aeroplane, is that right?
Yeah, I ended up getting, I believe, about $75,000 over 5 years.
Well, it's better than nothing.
When I sold out, the store was grossing $1.5 million a year in the 1981.
What did you do then?
I spent 5 years losing enormous sums of money with Dream Garden Press, publishing books that I lost my ass on, and I approached my friend Edward Abbey and did a 1982 Edward Abbey Western Wilderness Calendar. And that led over a decade to a line of national park and wilderness calendars that numbered 17 different calendars. And that's way too long of a story to get into, but suffice to say, the partner in that business defrauded me and left, stole all the employees, left me bankrupt, virtually bankrupt. I never declared bankruptcy. And later, the person that I tried to save the business with, he ended up stealing it from me and later sold my calendar company for $5 million. And I didn't get any of that money. I just got lawsuits.
It's not a very happy development.
No, and well, I've started the business I have now, that my daughter Melissa and she started working for me as a young teenager. I started this bookstore 11 years ago. And I was destitute, and I had nothing. I had from all the Dream Garden publishing days and all the financial nightmares, on top of which I also got defrauded in a house I bought and lost $250,000 on that. And I lost $750,000 with the publishing company. Now, Taylor, if you have money, there's no talent involved in losing it, but I would submit to you, losing damn near $1 million that you don't have is not easy. There's some kind of weird backwards talent involved in doing that. And I wouldn't ever declare bankruptcy. I rode it down. I rode the abyss all the way down to the bottom and clawed my way back. When we opened those doors 11 years ago, and the first day, lots of people came in, and absolutely nobody spent any money. And I've had some lean days in the ensuing 11 years, but never, ever have we had a 0 day again. And now, last year we grossed damn near $2 million.
I've been in your shop. Was it in the same location when you opened 11 years ago?
Yep.
It's a very inviting place with a lot of interesting things in it, I've got to say. What for you is, you've described yourself as a Luddite in some ways. Was the computer a threat or an opportunity for you when you first encountered it?
Well, I don't understand computers, and they don't like me. And it's kind of, the opening scene of Kubrick's 2001 with the apes and the bones and the grunting around the black monolith. That's kind of me and my computer every morning. And I can see the potential there, despite my lack of intelligence about them.
Well, here it is, 2008. Is it an important part of your business now?
Yeah, there's no way any of us are going to survive without it anymore. Because we sell esoteric books that nobody's ever going to come in the store for. I don't need a computer to sell Mormon books.
What percentage of your business these days is internet related versus retail through the shop traditionally? It's
still pretty slow. I doubt 20% 10% of our business is online. It's still relatively low, but it's got to be increasingly more and more, especially in these current unsettled times with the threat of President Palin out there. That's enough to scare all of us, I think. The rest of the world.
Shaky, just the thought of it. Well, despite your background and your interest in comics and illustrated books, and everything, these days you're most known as a specialist in Mormon material.
Yeah, I do a lot of, kind of Western writers, Western Americana, Western travels and explorations, which includes, you really can't tell the story of the American West without the Mormons. They had an integral part in it. And, for 19th century material, it's extraordinarily valuable. In 1830, that $5,000 Book of Mormon way back when is $100,000 now.
Hard to grasp.
And there's some extraordinary values in it.
And there are a lot of passionate Mormon collectors who collect Mormon material.
And for them, collecting a Book of Mormon, it's an 1830 Palmyra Book of Mormon has become the holy grail of Mormon book collecting. And I've gotten pretty well known for that, so people do come to me for it, and I get opportunities. We brokered a collection of LDS scripture in translation of Book of Mormons and Doctrine and Covenants as their other book of scripture, and for just under $500,000 in the past year. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and one would be extremely foolish not to deal in LDS material in Salt Lake City.
This is not a subject area where you've seen a decline in interest or willingness to pay.
Well, Mormons can be as cheap as anybody, don't get me wrong, but if you've got the good material...
When you've got the goods.
If you've got the top end in any field, the buyers will be there for it.
You've been in the ABAA how long?
10 or 12 years. I didn't join until I sat there, and I deliberately didn't join old Jim Pepper, our buddy Pep. He was after me for years to do it, but until I got through with all the financial travails back in the early 90s, I wasn't in a position to do it.
From your standpoint, I'm tying it together, what kind of a future do you see not only for the ABAA as a professional organization, but for the book trade in general? I mean, you have an open shop, you're moving some into the internet. What do you see for the future?
I do see a future. One, again, my previous remarks, we've always been in a far distant corner of the universe, and we always will be. We're a marginal segment of society.
Absolutely.
And I don't see that changing. And I'm going to keep doing it because I'm not gainfully employable. No one would ever hire me. I pretty much got to sell books for a living if I want to make a living. And it can be. It's so challenging, Ken Lopez and I years ago sat in Hadley, Massachusetts late one Sunday night at a restaurant there, drinking and him smoking his funny, silly, hand-rolled cigarettes Ken likes so much, and saying, God, if the general population knew what we did for a living, they'd kill to be us. Because it's, where else can you be challenged every day of your life and try and learn? It's all about learning these arcane things that
of course, that wouldn't appeal to a lot of people.
Oh, but to me, it's endlessly fascinating. I like to buy things I don't know about at every single book fair. Today, this fair, I'm on a Martian kick.
I saw your Martian pop-up book. I admired it at length.
Others might find it silly, but
not I.
But there is a future, and we just have to redefine it. We have to keep hustling. We have to find different people to sell books to, different kinds of books, different ways. It'll keep changing, but it's challenging. But it's interesting. There's always going to be a demand. We just have to fill it. Maybe we sell to the ultimate collector, whoever that may be, in a different manner than we've ever done before. And it's the internet, that's this whole age we live in. The computers and the internet have become the most significant and profound change since Gutenberg and his movable type.
Question.
And I don't pretend to understand it or know where it's going, but I'll be along for the ride for another 20, 25 years maybe.
I don't know how my car works, but I know it gets me where I want to go.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Well, you've already kind of answered the last question I was going to ask. Is do you see yourself retiring from the book trade?
No, it's not possible. I don't have. I mean, all this, the stock market crash, all this silliness. It's like, hey, my retirement portfolio is worth as much as it was 6 months ago, or a day ago, a year ago. Zero. I've got all these books, and unfortunately, they don't burn very well. Sarah Palin to the contrary, Taylor. They really don't burn well.
No, you're stuck with them.
But we're, maybe they can keep us warm. We can at least read them.
Absolutely.
There's always that. We can resort to reading them, opening the
books.
covers.
That's right.
So it's I'll sell books. Books and postcards. I have 25,000 different Utah postcards, Taylor, and that's the legacy of my father's collection.
Well, I know he'd be proud of you. I know he was proud of you. Ken, thank you for sitting down with us.
You bet, Taylor.